I'd like to welcome you back to the channel. So
Thank
we
you.
have with us today, thank you. We have with us today Michael Sugarman, MBA, MSW. He's the co-founder of the National Stuttering Project, and he is a gentleman that lives with a stutter. And the reason I asked him to come on today is because for those of you that remember, a short while ago, we did an interview with Austin Pendleton. And so as a result, I did more research. Learned a little bit more about stuttering, which is a fascinating, I guess, disease, if that's what we could call it, because it doesn't really live here and it doesn't really live there. But I guess Michael will explain a little bit more about it, and hopefully we'll learn some things in life from this
Yes.
conversation. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Michael Sugarman. So my journey began when I was a student at UC Santa Barbara. And at UC Santa Barbara, I went into the speech clinic there to work on my stutter, my speech disfluencies. And from that experience, I was there for about 7 to 8 months. And the directors used me as a peer mentor. So when new people came into the clinic, I would talk to them about living with the emotional ends of stuttering. So I depend upon a speech therapist to look on the skills of the techniques to learn how to communicate. And for me, it was the emotional end or the mental health end of stuttering. So it
Right.
was a combination of activities and skills that I had to learn for myself. So I'm on the campus of UC Santa Barbara, and there was a flyer that said, do you want to apply for a UC student lobbyist at our state capitol in Sacramento? Well, I said, yeah, I'm going to do that. Why not? I mean, I wanted to do kind of like, a stuttering self-help movement, self-help group, and, to start to organize people that stutter. So you have to remember in the late 70s at UC Santa Barbara, there was this whole social movement. Black history was being taught, Black studies, women's studies, Chicano studies. We had our first computer science department. So we're looking at late 70s. So a lot of social movements that were going on.
Right.
So I went up to Sacramento and I'm thinking, wow, this is really cool. Like I'll ask around about some funding. So at one of the legislators' aides told me, oh God, there's this guy named Bob Goldman who is looking to starting a national group. I said, oh my God. I'm here in California. He lives in Walnut Creek, which is close to Sacramento. I'll give him a jingle. And I called him. We met. By the end of January of 1977, the National Stuttering Project was born. Now,
Wonderful.
you have to remember, there was a lot of activities that was going on in Sacramento at that time. We had our governor, which you know him or have heard of him, is Jerry Brown. Well, Jerry Brown was also dating Linda Ronstadt at the time. So for me, Linda Ronstadt would give free concerts on Friday afternoon. So whoa. So I'm 23 years old. So I met up with Bob. We started, starting to organize, starting writing brochures, grants. And I returned to Santa Barbara. Now, at that time, you have to know what's going on in the disability rights field. In 77 was the famous sit-in at the Office of Education which was the Rehab Act of 504, which became what we know as the ADA, and then which was 1990. And then by 2008, we moved it on to, which is called the American Disabilities Act Amendment Act, which includes stuttering to prevent discrimination towards people who stutter. So backing up, so I returned to Santa Barbara, and I wanted to do, my our own group. So in the group, and very supportive from the speech clinic, because they knew that I kind of like went through their program, and I said there was a combination of speech and the identity as a person that stutters. So in the group, somebody shared that he went to court and he was on a witness stand, and the judge told him to remove himself from the witness stand because he doesn't want him to be drinking and an alcoholic on his court. Well, he came back to tell us that. And I go, well, that's not fair. He stutters. He wasn't an alcoholic. So I, with our group in Santa Barbara, we marched down to the Cook County Courthouse with bullhorns, and we stuttered. And outside his office, he came out. He apologized to the group and to apologize to the gentleman that he removed from his courtroom.
Mhm.
The guy cried. It was a wonderful social movement activity. So then I returned to Walnut Creek, where the Stuttering Project was started. And I kind of like lived in Bob's house for about 2 months. And the funny thing happened was there. So we started to doing a brochure. And then Bob and the State CASHA Association, so that's the California Association for Speech and Hearing, they gave us a table at their statewide conference. Well, they gave it to us for free, but it was right next to the bathroom. And whoa, it turned out that we were giving out an information about the Stuttering Project to everybody who has to go to the bathroom. So the yeah, so it was a lot of people. So by the end of 77, Bob left and I became the director of the Stuttering Project. And at that time, I was writing things, and in transactional analysis, I wrote a piece that was published in 78 called Moving from a Stutterer to a Person That Stutters. So we're moving from, in the late 70s, we're looking at person first language. So what you're talking about to advice, that was one of the common themes, to look at yourself as a whole person rather than your disability, rather than your stutter. So that was a piece that I started to talk about with other people. As you can imagine, we're talking about late 70s already. So we're talking about people going like, person, and we're stutterer. Saying, well, we got to remove that identity and got to be a whole person first. Right. So in 78, American Speech and Hearing Association, the big, all the speech therapists around the country came to San Francisco, which is, kind of like a BART trip from Walnut Creek. And at that time, we were starting to get a splinter groups, self-help groups in San Francisco, Los Angeles, just groups, Santa Barbara, groups throughout California. Well, John Albeck and I, we were around the same age. And so they invited me to become a panelist with the Council for Adult Stutterers on the last day. Well, what John and I did was we took our brochure and we put our brochure on every seat at every stuttering workshop. So whoever came, that we didn't have a table, but every stuttering workshop had our brochure. If you sat down, you picked up our brochure. Right. So this is 78. Now, you have to know that at that particular time, the heavyweights in the speech field was Joe Sheehan, William Perkins, Bill Perkins, also Gene Cooper and Hugo Gregory. Well, during their talk, a buddy of ours stood up in the middle of their conference, which was about 500 people, because stuttering, was a very interesting field for speech therapists, because it was kind of like, what is going on within the person who stutters functioning and how to help. So David said to him, can you refrain from using the word stutterer and start to use the word person who stutters? Whoa, wait a second, you're just a stutterer. You're all, I'm going like, not really. So as we look at most fields, like in the today's world, in the disability justice field, and my field as a social worker, we're looking at the whole person. So lo and behold, I was part of this panel. I was on the last day, Monday, like at 2:00, which is the getaway day, right? And the people are leaving the conference. They've been there since Thursday. Right. Overflow crowd. And I guess so, man. All right. So, so that's where I talked about this whole person image as the identity. And yes, we do stutter, but we're a whole person first.
Right.
And then the second thing was published in the Journal of Fluency Disorders it was okay to stutter. Mm-hmm. It's okay to be different. It's okay. As you can imagine. So we're looking at the late 70s, and that concept was pretty hard to take and grasp. Mm-hmm. So we're looking at, my advice are those two things. You're a whole person.
Right.
And yes, you have a difference, you have a diversity with speech. And yes, it's okay to have that. And right. As long as your self-esteem is not shot down by your stuttering and by people, the interference in the perception of that.
So yeah, what's interesting is that first of all, you're recapturing this moment from so long ago, like you're living in the moment. It was so moving and meaningful to you. Yes. And the other thing that's even more glaring is that you speak very, very fluently, and that's why when I first started, I said that people are not. It's hard for people to even explain where the challenge is. Like, is it in the brain? Is it physical? People have a challenge because people like to define things, and stuttering is almost magical in that it's not here and it's not there. It's something that you can control if you know the mechanisms of it, which are not what you would expect unless you were trained in it.
Yeah. So they're looking at it as a neurological.
Mm-hmm. No, but yet, if it was really neurological, how are you able to control it? So it's kind of
correct. It's a very interesting. So from my end, it's more on the emotional end and the anxiety end of going up. So moving on. So within the stuttering world at that time, the LA Times ran a piece on us, so that became national. So now the group was just focused in California, that we're getting letters from people from all over the country. Also, I did some public service announcements, and KCBS ran it, of course, in the Bay Area, Los Angeles, and throughout the country. So that also got people to write to us. So it's a huge thing. So we're looking at the late 70s of coming out and actually writing a letter. Some people would say to your stutter club, or I've been really depressed about this. I dropped out of school because I don't want this, or I have a job and I can't speak on my job. So on that note, there was a professor who was demoted in Louisiana for his stuttering. And I know we got it. Okay, I'm trying to move as fast as I can to give you.
You're good.
Okay, so he contacted us and he asked, "What should I do? I'm being demoted because of my stutter." Well, on our board at that particular time was a guy named Mark Green, who was an attorney, and you may like this, but he was an attorney also on the team for Lenny Bruce. So he gave us some history about that. But he came up with a really interesting idea, and we floated back to Dr. Ray, and his attorney was have every student to come up and testify of whether or not the stutter affected them learning biology.
Let the facts speak for itself.
Oh God, all right, absolutely right. Okay, so we're talking about late 70s now. So there's no ADA, there's no 504, there's no protection, there's no feeling of discrimination, but people were contacting the national organization and like, this is happening to me. So we floated it back, and his attorney said, whoa, well, what happens if a student says that it does affect? Well, that's the risk you have to take. Fortunately, all the students wrote in and said, no, I'm learning biology. I don't care if he stuttered or not. So they settled out of court, and he returned to his teaching position in biology. So that gives you one example, which was, a really good thing. Now, at
Power
that,
of numbers. Basically, you organized and you felt the power of numbers in a decade that was full of protests, but not necessarily for what you needed. So you created an army of your own,
thank you.
right?
Thank you
I mean,
very much.
that's pretty much it.
So with that, so then within the federal government, we're moving away from what is this called, the Handicap Act for children, to receive services. Well, we moved that to what is called the Individual Disability Education Act. So it's important for us to be in Washington, in our state capital, to start to write letters. So 12 of the about 50 groups start to write to support that children who stutter should receive speech therapy services in school. And now, in 2023, that's pretty standard. But back in the late 70s, that was kind of like a new thing. So
It was a different.
Yeah, it's a different thing. So then, slowly, because of fortunately, we got some interviews. Started, the newspapers started to pick us up, self-help group, and then when I talked about it's okay to stutter, you could imagine at that particular time what the reaction was. So, but today, fortunately, that you'll see if you go the summer camps, the kids say it's okay to stutter. Wow, okay, I'm different, but I want to say what I want to say. So, what you were saying about the challenges of the neurological effect, anxiety, and who you want to be as a whole self. So those two concepts, and then there is a gentleman who is a jazz trombonist who had his own band called Turk Murphy New Orleans Jazz here in San Francisco, and he stuttered. So he had a thing called, so we had the dance called Meeting at the Stutterers Ball. And we have lots of people showing up at the Stutterers Ball dancing, and Turk was interviewed by Dwight Chapman, who was a syndicated columnist at the Chronicle, and that became a national thing. So that was someone who was known in the jazz field, talking about his stuttering. It was a really important time where, he also talked about the Stuttering Project, but also he talked about his stutter. So we're talking about beginning to having people to open up. Mm-hmm. So then I fortunately, had left the Stuttering Project in the capable hands of John Allback, and John so I got a job with which is called the Disability Rights Education Defense Fund, and we did trainings for disabled folks all around the country. So in 81 to 83. So that was really important for the stuttering community, because I'm 26 and I got a chance to go around the country, Ari. And so because I had the list of all the speech therapists who had come to the 78 conference, I contacted them, went to their classes, and not only talked to speech therapists, but also talked to people who stutter. So those concepts of people who stutter was this whole person, and it's okay to stutter, was pretty hard to take at that time. But But as we saw what happened throughout the years, that has become kind of like a standardized. So John, what he did in '84 was to host the first national conference for people that stutters throughout the country. So people started to come to that. For me, I got a job over at Stanford Med as a medical social worker, and I worked in the AIDS field. But in the '90s, in the therapeutic world, we started to look at person and family focused therapy. So we're looking at, from the late '70s, Carl Rogers, person first language, person to identify. So by the '90s, the therapeutic community has caught up to the self-help community to make this movement about looking at the whole person, and the focus become the whole person. So, fortunately, during that stretch, I was learning some skills about therapy and group therapy. And I'll say this to you, because it's a very difficult time for therapists, because when we use the term therapy, the people go, "Oh God, that means I'm really sick," or so, something, there's something really wrong with me. So what we're trying to use is a term called skills therapy. So as therapists, we're actually providing skills to people. Mm-hmm. So, for example, so in the '90s, what has happened within the community, in the professional world, we're starting to integrate peers into our clinics. Like, for example, I was a lead social worker in AIDS. So we would take somebody who had AIDS, but have them working in the clinic like a peer mentor to people coming in. Right. So yeah, which makes sense. So we're making it a whole, the whole spectrum. Right. And it was basically a huge change. Also, and that's where the term, so I'm in the medical social worker field. So we deal with diabetes, cancer, just anything what you were saying, like medical. So what the language we were starting to use was people living with AIDS, people living with cancer, people living with a stutter, people, okay, you have this. Okay, how are you going to cope? How are you going to do this? So the civil rights movement happened, of course, the ADA was passed in 1990, and there was a huge, not only the LGBT, pride movement, but there was a disability pride movement too in 1990 to celebrate the community and about, the success of that. So the reason why I brought that up is because in 2000, we started to see a change. A lot of people use the term disability justice. So we moved from disability rights to disability justice. For me, because I guess I was kind of like an older guy at the time, I looked at it as is from civil rights to human rights. Mm-hmm. It was kind of like a move from, okay, so now we have our civil rights. How about now our personal rights of being, of just, Ari, exactly right. So I was a part of kind of like starting to write stuff with the International Fluency Association and the International Stuttering Association about the Bill of Rights for people who stutter. It's just a part of this whole movement in 2000, after a lot of people felt like their civil rights were starting to meet. Now, by 2008, we not only had the concept of the American Disabilities Act Amendment Act, which includes mental health, people with cancer, people with a stutter, to be covered under this law. Also, in the mental health community, we started to do, which was called the Mental Health Acts, and then the Mental Health and Substance Abuse Act. So what we did was we started to use, okay, so, there's a 12-step program, which, everybody knows about. So what we started to do was to integrate people who have a history with alcohol to be a part of our programs in behavioral health and mental health. So now we're looking at integrating and incorporating them into this language. So backing up, so in 2000, there was a definitely, like you were saying, social movements of the 70s. In 2000, that people were feeling like, okay, we have our civil rights, but now how about our own personal rights?
Right.
And in the therapeutic world, that's what we're working on. Like I'll just give you a hint. I learned cognitive behavior therapy. So it's called radical reframing.
Yes.
And then in dialectical behavior therapy, you had radical acceptance, doing opposite action. And now with dialectical behavior therapy, we're moving in with mindful meditation for the groups. Getting people present, getting people, okay, yes, you have a history of a stutter that, and a lot of people who stutter talk about things that happen in grammar school. Yes, it happened. But how do we move somebody from what had happened in grammar school? Well, what we did in the therapeutic world, hopefully starting in the speech therapy world, is using creative outlets, poetry. Like in working with AIDS patients, was talking about people, to write poems about that. So where we are today, which is exciting, the last 5 years or something, is dialectical behavior and cognitive behavior. We're looking at now, it's called radical openness.
Radical openness.
Yeah. And to getting people, there's a program called, it's called Honest, Open, and Proud. And saying like, okay, you have, okay, let's just say, okay, so I have a stutter, but I have to tell somebody, or I'm going to be locked in and not telling, people that I love or people about me and my stutter. So how am I going to do that? So this program called Honest, Open, and Proud is a program to look at pros and cons of basically to coming out with an issue.
Got it.
Then the second session is the interesting session to me. It's like, we're so used to speed up things. And so, oh, you role play one time. So in this way, we want person to role play 3 to 5 times to get comfortable about how they're going to present themselves. So one time, we're such in a fast age and with technology, blah, 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 that we want to move fast. We just say like, okay, oh, well, I got it the one time, I got it down. Well, no, so we want to have them to do this process of at least 3 times, just practicing it with the group of how you want to present yourself. And then, of course, the 3rd time is going out in the world. Now, to tell you what's going on in here in the Bay Area and in basically the tech world, 2 instances around Zoom, which is really interesting for people who stutter, because not only am I going to have to talk to you, but if I stutter, it's recorded and you'll see it, and you'll see my facial grimaces, and here it is. So there's an HR department. This person was telling me that his manager announced it before the Zoom meeting that he stuttered. He felt totally comfortable. Because of the discrimination laws, HR is more aware. So he was sharing that when he went in for the job interview, the HR person said to him, "Oh, you stutter, take as much time as you want." Okay, so we're looking at what has happened in 1990 with the ADA, and in 2008, what happened with the ADAA, and with all these changes that, and pinned it up right, and that was an army or a mass social movement that was going on.
Right.
Then we had the other story of someone who said they introduced, the person as a stutterer to the Zoom meeting. Well, got pissed off. So contacted me and said, well, should I take this person to HR? Well, okay, you can do that. How would you like to remediate that situation? So this person chose to talk to the manager, and the next Zoom meeting, she announced to the group that she stutters. The group said, right, we already knew, but it's okay. So it's an affirmation that she felt comfortable, and people wanted her to share more because she opened herself up. So this whole movement about radical openness is kind of like telling people in school as well, is okay, I have a difference. It's whether or not you're going to accept me or not. We always want at least 4 or 5 people in your social connection that accepts you. Right. So you don't get into a whole spiral of depression. So that's where we are. Some of the insight would be, it's okay to stutter, and coming out is tough. It's a tough thing. And the society is catching up to us.
Society's catching up to you.
To us, yeah, it's basically, there's a lot of, with these pride movements, so you're in New York, right?
Yes.
Well, in October, there's going to be a huge disability pride parade in Manhattan. So you'll hear about it, or you'll see it in the New York Times. But, those are things that came up. And what we found was the pride work helps with self-esteem, because okay, so if we say the community is pride, however, that we're looking at specific groups like a camp group, like Camp Shout Out. There's pride in knowing those social connections of you're building friendships.
Correct.
So times are going to be changing. I know that after I leave this earth, there'll be, but I think we're trying to leave it as a better place for people who stutter, and trying to make that as a world that people can, talk about their stuttering in an open space and feeling comfortable about it.
That's wonderful. And I feel like you were born into the exact right time.
Thank you, Ari.
Exact right time between the movements of back then and the social media and the acceptance of psychology throughout the time period you're describing. I'm a 70s baby.
Oh, so then
I know that, in the 80s, if you expressed your feelings, you were considered strange. And then in the 90s,
weird.
If you didn't express your feelings, you were considered strange.
Yeah.
So I lived through it, and I understand. I wasn't there for all the protests. My parents were from California. So they were familiar with, the hippie movements and just all the different types of experiences of protest and expression. And it's kind of cool that your thing, your passion, it's slid in there at just the right time. It's almost like a miracle from my observation.
Well, I'm pretty lucky. Lucky. You're right. Thank you, Ari. I'm pretty lucky.
I would imagine it must give you a lot of pride to see how large what you've accomplished in comparison to when back then you probably felt great about these small little movements with 50 people, 10 people, and you're looking at tens of thousands or something. It's got to be an amazing feeling.
It's a wonderful feeling.
Good for you.
I'm pretty lucky to see, kids today being open, and there's more summer camps for people who stutter, for children who stutter, and the parents are also going in that route. It's interesting that you mentioned about social movements and how true that is. So I was asked a question about that, and that was saying, Mike, so what would you've done differently in trying to look back? And I said maybe be a little more radical. And follow what we did in Santa Barbara with the protests about with bullhorns and going down to a judge. That individual, I mean, Ari, it was so just everybody felt connected, and the judge to come out and apologized and directly told the guy. It was just heartwarming.
Right. And people who didn't live in those times don't understand that you were living in a time there was no psychologist giving you warm love. There was like probably water cannons and just sticks. And I mean, when you say you should have been more radical, who knows what kind of beating that could have brought on. I mean, it was a different time.
Yeah, maybe.
I
Yeah, but thank you. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you for coming on. It's a pleasure to hear your story. I think it's a lot to share and a lot for people to learn from. And I'm glad to have had you on here.
Thank you, Ari. Thank
All
you
right.
very much. Namaste to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much.